everybody. My name is Kaitlin O'Connor. I am the site manager of Bennett Place State Historic Site in Durham, and I am excited to talk to you all today virtually about Fort Fisher and Wilmington's role in World War II. So I had the privilege of working down at Fort Fisher for a couple of years before moving back up here to Durham. And so today I'll be sharing with you about Fort Fisher's World War II history and how this fight that happens again at a Civil War fort really challenges the southern port town. So Wilmington, North Carolina is host to a couple of different outposts in World War II based around Camp Davis, which is just north of Wilmington. And Fort Fisher becomes a training outpost for live firing activities for anti-aircraft artillerymen during World War II. So Fort Fisher really opens again in 1941, some 80 years after the Confederate fort was captured by U.S. soldiers in the Civil War. And so here in World War II, soldiers spend most of their time training at Camp Davis, but they're going to come down to Fort Fisher to utilize the open beach for live firing of massive anti-aircraft artillery guns, other long-range artillery weaponry. At the time, Carolina Beach is a growing beach town, but there's not yet much development at Curry Beach, which is just north of Fort Fisher today. So it's a really good spot to make loud guns go boom many times without upsetting too many locals. And so while they're down here at Fort Fisher, soldiers joke that if nothing else hardened the men, that at least the mosquitoes did. They're dealing with the unpleasantry of camping on the beach, if you will, full time while they're training here at Fort Fisher. When they're not actively in drills at Fort Fisher, Camp Davis, these guys spent a lot of time at Carolina Beach, Wrightsville Beach, and Seabreeze, the African American beach just north of Carolina Beach. So it really helps these beach towns flourish. And soldiers also spend a lot of their free time in the town of Wilmington as well. So while they're here, some of these soldiers and military contractors try to change the gender and racial stereotypes and expectations of an American city and a Southern city. So the very first people to train at Fort Fisher in October of 1941 are African American members of the 54th Coast Artillery Regiment. They're brought over from Texas after local officials there appear to convince the U.S. Army to push these soldiers out. So they're unhappy with having Black soldiers in their beach town at Galveston, Texas. So they are transferred to Camp Davis, North Carolina for further anti-aircraft and coast artillery training. So the first ones here at Fort Fisher, it's possible that Fort Fisher really starts as a segregated facility and that the attack at Pearl Harbor was what sparked Fort Fisher to turn perhaps from a segregated camp to a facility for soldiers of all colors to train so they can more quickly prepare to deploy overseas. While 54th is here, again, this is before the U.S. involvement officially in World War II. These men are pairing military service with activism. Men like this gentleman on the left here, Ulysses Joyner, spoke out against racist treatment from their officers, from military policemen, and from local law enforcement who consistently mistreat and assault African American soldiers for little to no reason at all in the port town as well as on some of these bases. They're also assigned disproportionately to cleaning details and other undesirable shifts and duties for soldiers. And one of the members of the 54th wrote that we desire to be soldiers, but will not tolerate being the brunt of the hangover from slavery. So they're recognizing this racial hierarchy and the system of white supremacy still at work in cities like Wilmington and finding ways to speak out against it. So men like Ulysses S. Joyner start writing letters to family members and colleagues in the NAACP trying to get investigations into the mistreatment at these military bases and at the very least pull Black regiments out of these southern towns where racial tensions are heightened. This kind of dates back to a long-standing tradition of manhood and democracy in the Western world, where service should buy you respect and greater civil rights. And so we see soldiers like Ulysses Joyner trying to claim those rights, which had been denied to them by virtue of their skin color. So you might have heard more about this in this morning's presentation by my colleague Kelly Scott in the 54th Regiment, and as well as civilians like Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown and their efforts in what becomes the Double Victory campaign of World War II. I mentioned there's also challenging of gender expectations in wartime Wilmington. In order to keep Camp Davis running with thousands of soldiers coming in and out every few months, they're training here relatively quickly before they are deployed overseas. There's a lot of women employed at Camp Davis and the outposts nearby, both as members of the Women's Auxiliary Corps and civilian contractors like the Women Air Force Service pilots. So some of these civilian contractors and administrators for the U.S. Army are going to be laundresses and hostesses, help run the theater and the library, do some of this traditional women's work on base to keep everything running. Also answer phones and fill some administrative roles to help keep the officers' quarters running and the administrative side of the camp running as well. And then we have the Women Air Force Service pilots, or WASP for short, come to Fort Fisher and Camp Davis in mid-1943. They stay for about a year until late 1944. And the woman you see on the right of your screen here, her name is Dora McEwen. She's about one of 50 WASPs here in the area. So WASPs are a relatively elite group of primarily white women throughout the United States who volunteer to serve as military contractors with the United States Army Air Force. And they go through several weeks of intense flight training, just like U.S. Army pilots get. They learn to fly 3 to 6 different types of aircraft, single engine and double engine aircraft. Initially, the WASP program is created for essentially taxi services and other very low stakes operations of moving planes around the United States. But at posts like Camp Davis, WASP actually helped train these anti-aircraft artillery soldiers in their live firing drills. I always like to say, how do you get really good at playing basketball? Well, you have to practice more than you play. So you need to be out shooting your free throws and your layups. And that's exactly what these women are helping the soldiers do. You can't learn how to shoot down a moving aircraft across the sky until you practice shooting at something moving across the sky. So pilots, particularly WASP at Camp Davis, will fly target tow planes with a canvas target towed behind the plane. Think almost like a advertisement being flown behind a plane they might see if you go to the beach this summer. It's the same idea. The soldiers are ideally shooting at that target behind the plane, but like I said, they're still in training. So one soldier said that he felt bad for the women pilots. Sometimes they would come back with bullet holes throughout their plane. So they're still learning how to accurately shoot at the target identified. So this important role does quite a few things. First, from the U.S. Army's perspective, it frees up more men to fly overseas combat missions. There's still a social expectation at the time that women shouldn't be in combat or near combat at all. So these women do stay stateside, allows more men to go fight overseas. But these women pilots excel at their roles. They even go on to become flight instructors and test pilots for different types of aircraft. And what really strikes me about this WASP story is that these women are elite for their social class at the time because they already had to have hundreds of hours of flight time before they could even apply to this Women Air Force Service pilot training for the Army. And in the 1930s, that's something not everybody is going to have the opportunity to do, particularly in the coattails of the Great Depression. So these women are extremely patriotic. They want to prove themselves as women pilots, but they don't have to be doing this. They're making the choice to separate themselves from their families, do what they love, serve their country, and even take risks, because they know some of these bullets that are flying at their targets might hit their aircraft, leading to a fatal crash. And I just have to show this picture because I think it's pretty awesome to see. Looks like a poster I would like to try and pull off myself. Dora McEwen said that, I think aside from the thrill of it, anytime that any of the women pilots flew, they felt they were representing women worldwide and for generations to come. We knew we were breaking barriers and we had to fly our best. And thanks to the women pilots, that's what the anti-aircraft soldiers are able to do. Here we have a picture of members of the 559th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Regiment posing near the wreckage of a Me-262 Nazi aircraft that was shot down by Private First Class Caputo in Germany. So the WASP at Camp Davis and similar posts really help the Allied forces train, deploy, and achieve air superiority in Europe by mid-1944. And so these women are proving themselves and providing a great service for the military. They will go on, some of them go on to continue to serve in what becomes the Air Force, while many of them return to civilian lives afterwards. And for those veterans of the 54th Coast Artillery Regiment who faced racial discrimination while in service in Wilmington, they continue to bring that fight for double victory home with them as well after the war. Many, including Ulysses Joyner himself, go on to fight during the civil rights movement for equality and civil rights for all. So both these Black men and white women start to challenge expectations in a predominantly white society, white male society, of what is capable of different people. And so we start to see that here in World War II, and they continue to spark that for generations to come. Right. And that is just a little bit about World War II and the home front's role in our North Carolina history. Thank you guys so much.